Okay, welcome back everybody to another episode of Control Yourself. I haven't done one of these in a while. I've been
It's been a
working
minute.
on, yeah, I've been working on a bunch of stuff. We had the Kinstretch Level 2 that we had to do, and then we had the summit in Austin. And now I'm working on that. We're actually going to do this summit in Prague. When is that coming?
Nice.
Yeah, a European version of the summit coming up at the beginning of May. So people listening can stay tuned for that. But yeah, I haven't. I've been at the desk doing a lot of research and stuff. How have you been, Hunter?
Good. Busy. We just got through the holiday times, but work's been busy. 2024 was a killer year, so for
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
And
You were all over the place, eh?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Actually,
just
you know
getting
what?
2025 started strong.
Funny enough, we always get into these things, and then I forget to actually introduce who you are at the on the podcast. And like, I assume that everyone knows Hunter.
It's possible.
Which it might be possible. For those few unfortunate people who don't, how about we just start off by telling us kind of your background and how long you've been doing what you do. I guess even for people who don't know that, Hunter has been a trainer, strength and conditioning coach for a long time now, right? As well as an instructor for functional range systems. But
Absolutely. Yeah, my name's Hunter Cook.
yeah,
The internet would have you believe my name is Hunter Fitness, but that's not true. My last name is Cook. And I've been with you, Dre, for 10 years now. But
yeah.
I got my first job in a physical therapy office as a PT aide in 2002.
Okay.
So 23 years ago, I started on the journey of wanting to become a physical therapist and going down the education path of that. I went to school for kinesiology, exercise science. While in school, I then worked as a personal trainer, strength and conditioning coach, while as a physical therapist aide. And then graduating with my degree in kinesiology, I actually branched off more into the strength and conditioning, personal training side of things,
Mhm.
and just decided to go private in that realm in the private sector and went down my own continuing education rabbit hole as self-employed people tend to do, which is what led me to finding you many years later. So about
What year?
22, 23 years of doing things within this realm.
And what was that? Do you remember when we
I met you either at the end of 2014 or early 2015. I don't remember. It was in that region of like winter 2014.
yeah, then we started working together, and then after you became an instructor of the systems, the functional range systems, I mean, from then on, I mean, you've been everywhere around the world. You've taught a variety of professional sports organizations and
Yep.
other types of organizations all over the place. I think last year you must have been in the air. How often? I mean, how many places did you have to go?
Sometimes it felt like I was gone more than I was here.
Really?
But I don't know the number. But I was in airports a lot.
It's the worst. You know what though? The we've had you were on once before, and I don't really remember what we spoke about, but the reason we were kind of putting this one together was to maybe go over your experience that you had at the Olympic Games in Tokyo over the summer.
Paris.
In Tokyo. Oh my goodness, in Paris. Oh my,
Tokyo was before that though, so
I'm at
it's
the
in your
wrong. I'm at
memory.
the wrong Olympic. It was Tokyo was 2020 then.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Tokyo was
So
2020.
so yeah. I mean, it was not too long ago, maybe a month or so, or actually a few more now. So
Yeah.
tell me, how did it go? How did you like? You've been to Paris before, but not
Yep.
during the Olympics, and I've not been during
Correct.
the Olympics, so how was it?
The Olympics was wild. It was a unique experience. Just if you've been to Paris before, Paris is a bustling city, you know that, and almost all the locals leave for a situation like that. So Paris was although it was bustling, millions of people flew in from all over the world. It was actually calm. Like you could bike ride down the center, streets that normally are car to car, traffic, and you could just kind of like take
Uh,
a rental bike and just ride down the middle of the streets and everything. So it was a unique time because I've been there before and after the Olympics since. I've already gone back since. And it was a very special time. But the Olympics itself was electric. I've been to sporting events my whole life. We all have, right? But there's something very unique about it, not just being like New York versus California or Florida versus Arkansas. Like this is like Japan versus the US versus Uruguay versus versus China versus Russia. Like it's just everybody. It's the world stage. It's quite literally the biggest stage for athletics. So the energy that super fans bring to that is bigger than any super fan energy I've seen at a normal event.
Oh, you must have met people from everywhere then, eh?
Everywhere,
Oh,
100% everywhere.
that's so
Yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you were saying so like the Champs-Élysées or the all of the major streets were kind of blocked. So
Yes.
you got to see it like in the oh wow, because
Yeah, it was a very unique
Paris is
scenario,
like
which also
everyone
made it
else.
hard to get around if you were trying to get somewhere far. Like you can
Oh
get
yeah.
in a cab or an Uber and they don't even know what the closures are. So you end up just getting stuck at these road closures. So pros and
Mm.
cons, but it was still wonderful.
Oh, wow. I mean, Paris falls victim to the same thing as a lot of places now where you go and like you see those Instagram photos, but then realistically how long it took to get the photo and
Yeah.
billion of people are in the view and stuff like that.
A
But,
100%.
yeah, that must have been a cool experience. Now, specifically, you were there in support of one of your athletes, who most everyone is going to know, Sydney McLaughlin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sydney McLaughlin Levrone. She is a phenom.
Unbelievable. Like
Yeah.
watching her was just I couldn't believe it. Now, a little bit about Sydney. So she's 400 meter hurdles and 400 meters. She went to University of Kentucky. This is all the background research that I did. Now, she's turned pro in 2018.
Yep.
And then since that, we have gold medalist in 400 meter hurdles at the oh, that's maybe where I got it, at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Silver medalist at the 4x400 meter relay in Tokyo. And now in at Paris, what happened in Paris? So for those of us who don't, or those of people who don't know.
Well, just explain. She, for one, in the Paris Games, she actually got two gold Olympics in this Olympic Games. So she got gold medal for her 400-meter hurdles, and then she got the gold for the 4x4 relay. In between those gold medals, she had her birthday. So, like, how cool is that for her? She turned 25. She's only 25 years old, which is
Oh my
makes it
God.
more amazing. And this is her third Olympic Games. So
Mm.
she was at Rio 2016. She was at Tokyo 2020. So at 25 years old, she's or 24 when she entered this one, third Olympic Games, and she left with two gold medals here, but has many more medals. But in this Olympic Games specifically, there's two things that are just unreal, and the world's been talking about since, which is she broke her own world record for the sixth time. So
Yes.
she just keeps, and not by like a fraction of a millisecond. Like she, this one specifically from the last world record to this one, it's like the time difference between those two normally takes years, if not decades, to break. And she did it just months apart. And so she broke her world record again, now for the sixth time. And then I've heard a lot because I've now been introduced to a lot of people in the track and field world that although that's amazing, no one will ever take that away. Her second medal, which is a group, it's a team thing. It's the Team USA Women's 4x4. But that's not something she trained for all year long. Like the women's relay is something like because you're a part of Team USA, you take part in the team events and things like that. Where she is specifically a 400-meter hurdler, but she did the 4x4, so she's a hard runner. She's very good at what she does, so she ran it. And the time that she got, I don't know if you watched that event too, but like
Yeah, yeah.
the camera couldn't keep anyone else in frame while she was running, which is normal for her races at this point. And she just pulls so far ahead. And for an event that she didn't really train for, an event that she wasn't there at the Olympics for, she got within like 0.1 seconds of a record that people said couldn't be beat. It's been held for like 42 or 43 years for an event that she didn't go to the Olympics for. So a lot of people are saying that obviously the breaking the world record again of her 400-meter hurdles is probably the thing she'll be known for. People really deep in the track and field world are actually more impressed by her secondary feat, which is just how much she dominated the women's 4x4.
Yeah, it was staggering to watch.
Yeah.
It was staggering. It was funny you say that, like the view, the person who was doing the race probably had a hard time
Yeah,
deciding what to
if
focus
you're
on.
watching on TV, you're thinking it's just like someone's running by themselves. There's a stadium of people, and then there's just one person on the track. What's happening? And then the camera switches, and then there's like eight other people back here.
It's incredible. So
Yeah.
so you got you're working with a phenom athlete, right?
Yes.
So of course, without getting specific, because for the people in the audience who don't know, when you're dealing with athletes, there's a lot of things that we you don't want to talk about with regards to the training, with regards to how
Right.
things are going, et cetera, et cetera. But within reason, I'd like to dig in a little bit to how this happened. Like, what was the scenario when she came to you? How old was she, maybe, or where was she in her training? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you started, maybe just the whole story. Just give me the story as to how this happened.
Sure. Yeah. Like it was a big dose of hard work and a combination of luck. It's right people, right time. there were several points of contact in Sydney's life where FRC came up as a talking point. So two main branches. One, her husband is Andre Levrone Jr., who was in the NFL, and he is an incredible athlete as well, and he's an amazing human being. And he actually had the opportunity of working with John Quint and in his last stint with the NFL. So for anyone that knows John, John works with a lot of the NFL guys. And when Andre was doing it, he got exposed to our system, in his later years in the NFL. And
Actually,
so
let me jump in. So people who don't know who are listening, so Hunter mentioned FRC, functional range conditioning, one of the functional range systems, and then the other gentleman mentioned was John Quint, who is another one of the instructors of the functional range system. So
right.
her husband, who did he play for again? Now I'm drawing a blank. Do you remember?
Oh God, I want to say Ravens, but I don't want to be misquoted on
Oh,
that.
you're gonna get yelled at. You get yelled at because we deal with all these professional sports teams.
I
So
know.
you don't know is
I know. It's because
let's just pretend
there's
we didn't have
too
that.
big of a roster, Dre. It's hard to categorize everybody in my head.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so you met her through you were saying
So
through
yeah, so that was one point of contact. Is her husband really benefited from Quint's work and FRC and internal training, and really noticed like, oh, there's something here. And it was kind of like, how every athlete says at one point, like, wish I started this sooner, kind of thing, right? Like that's everyone's response to this system. If there's one line that's repeated more, I'd be surprised. So then Sydney's performance director, his name is Malachi Davis. He's kind of like the head coach. He's the team guy. He's the one that kind of runs everything. He is the guy who's organizing everything, introducing Sydney to who she needs to be introduced to, finding all the things that can give her that edge, that 1%. So he's always trying to figure out. He the way he's explained to me, he goes, I'm really good at relationships. I'm good at communication. I'm good at bringing people together. I don't want to be the best at FRC. I don't want to be the best at strength. I don't want to be the best at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a team. We're going to make a team to help Sydney, right?
is he a
So
trainer? Is he a trainer as well?
yeah, and he's ex-Olympian actually. So he
Okay.
went to Olympic Games years ago. So he's an Olympic track runner. And so his friend, which is also, I believe they're in their 40s. His friend was someone that I met in college, and when I re-met him, so I knew him a long time ago, like 20 years ago. When I met him again as an adult, he was trying to get back to masters track, but was injured.
Okay.
And when you're trying to get back to kind of masters competition and you're dealing with nagging injuries, it's one of those things you kind of have to make a decision. Like, is this really what am I going to keep going through the recurring injuries, or am I going to do something about it? Is there another path, whatever else? And he stumbled upon me, FRC. He came to my kin stretch classes, then hired me privately. And then he got back. He did it. Like, he did what he wanted. And funny enough, I don't know when this is to be posted, but I just posted last week a post on Instagram about that guy, Nate. And he's 45 years old and just ran, and like with sensors and everything, 21.8 miles per hour. And it was like a 10.2 100-meter section at 45 years old. And then he messaged me, he sent it to me, and he goes, man, I've been getting faster every year since I worked with you. I can't thank you enough. So that's still going well. So Malachi, Sydney's performance director, saw Nate have such a positive experience with FRC. Andre, Sydney's husband, had such a positive experience with FRC. As a team, they're getting together, and when they're thinking like, how can we really organize to make sure that Sydney continues to compete at a high level and has no issues and really has longevity in sport, what's the most that we can do, right? Because for a lot of people out there, Gen Pop and everything else, everyone's always trying to figure out like the path of least resistance and what's the minimum effective dose, what's the least I could do to still get the most benefit. When you're at the top 1%, it's like, what's the most you can do? What's the maximum effective dose? Where is every little string that we can pull to get another 1% out of this? And so they reached out to me sometime between the Tokyo and Paris Olympics, but closer to Tokyo. And that was on like the tail end of COVID, when kind of communication first started, and when I finally got to meet Sydney and Malachi and Andre.
So when you got her, she was obviously she was already an elite athlete, and as you're saying, you now are tasked to work within a team-like setting.
Yes.
And I've been there a countless number of times over my career. As you know, we have scenarios where we have the athlete, and all of their conditioning is run through us, all of their assessment, all of their manual therapy, and then we have the ones who come already with a team.
Yes.
I've always found provides a little bit of an initial challenge, Um, and I have many stories that I can expand on that out. But
100%.
what was the experience for you meeting the team, and what kind of a size team are we talking about for an athlete of this caliber?
I kind of went into it to tease off of what you said there or hinted at. Like, I kind of went into this with the mindset that I was going to have, and I'm going to say at the front end, I was wrong with my assumption. But I went into this being like, this is a big athlete with a big team. This probably isn't going to go well because the thing that I know you've experienced and I've experienced with other athletes in the past, which is not the case with Sydney's team, is it becomes a too many cooks in the kitchen problem, right? Like when somebody comes with the team, everyone thinks they have the right answer. So now there's this guy and he believes his training system is the right answer. And then there's this person who has this experience and works with these athletes, believes, well, you should be spending most of your adaptive currency on what I want to work on. And it ends up being a bunch of battling ideologies and adaptive currencies being spent too quickly and over aggressively, and the person doesn't get better. And so I've seen this happen a lot, really, with some of the highest and most well-known athletes that I've worked with, and it never goes well. So I come into a situation like this where another athlete's reaching out, and I start to just listen to how people are talking, and I see how many people are on the team, like you said, and I start to kind of generate this idea in my head of how well this is going to go. And now that several years have passed, I can tell you that I was wrong in almost all my assumptions. Malachi, who, like I said, is the performance director, the guy who's connecting everybody and organizing it all, has done a better job at being a team captain than any other athlete situation I've ever seen. So, how big her team is, I think that depends on the time of year. Like last year for an Olympic year, it was enormous. Like she had everything under the sun, available to her because that's what's required to have someone compete at that level. She broke her world record twice last year alone, only a month apart from each other. So like to keep her in the physical condition where it's like it almost seemed, and I don't know if this is true, but it's like she like peaked for like 5 months last year, which is like not a window that you peak for. It's either that or like we successfully trained so well. I say we as Team Sid, not just me, but like I successfully trained so well that like the early ones that were her winning race, those were not her peaking. She was holding back, right?
Mhm.
Like that because we all know that you can't compete at that highest level week after week for that length of time.
Mhm.
So it's been an incredible thing to really witness something go so well from an organizational standpoint, because Sydney puts her trust in Malachi to organize the right people to meet and the right stressors to go through
Mhm.
on a regular basis. And he actually does a really good job at that.
That's excellent. So, I mean, I was going to ask you, with regards to, ideologies and stuff, I'm sure you found this as well when we're teaching or traveling to different sports organizations and sports teams. There's that morning of the first day of a seminar where, people are looking at you and they already have this idea in mind as to what they should do. Everyone's coming with more experience than cumulatively than you can even come close to. So it's always an interesting morning right before the first break,
Right,
kind of
right.
explain where you're coming from. And I mean, it's never been a problem for us and for our system, mostly because once people get past what I saw on Instagram nonsense and they get to the course the course is within the first little while, you realize that we're taking a scientific approach and we're just kind of changing the lens of focus of that scientific approach.
Right.
So we're speaking the same language as these people. So, despite it being difficult, there is ways to overcome these communication barriers. But going back to Sydney, so when you first got her, obviously you assessed her, I'm assuming, and I don't
Yeah.
want to get into any of the assessment findings, but when you're tasked again to take a look at this athlete amongst other professionals, so let's say that maybe her strength programming is already being done, and nutritional programming is being done, and all these other things are being done. So they came to you, I'm guessing as a mobility coach, because that's kind of where the
Yep.
internet slotted the functional range systems as a whole. Um,
Right.
so let's go with that, and let's just pretend that we're putting on our only mobility hat. How did you and this is going to be weird because all of the answers that you're going to give are going to pull us back into the idea that we're not just doing mobility.
Right,
Mobility
right,
is this weird word that people associate with, the desire to access more space
right.
or the ability to move through more space, I guess we can say. But assuming you are the mobility coach, at least at the beginning, what do you do for the initial assessment on any of your athletes? You know,
Yeah, so I'll talk about the assessment process because to me, the assessment process, and I don't even know if Malachi or Sydney would agree with this, but for me, it's wholeheartedly what I believe, which is like the assessment done well, and as long as you're communicating the findings, especially with repeat assessments, is it's like that's the buy-in process. I always feel like I don't have to sell my services. I just have to show people what I find. If I show people what I find well and I communicate what these things mean, and how that relates to their sport or whatever else. Like I never just say, and so by the way, my package over here, what like it's just people want to get to the solution as to what the assessment shows them. So via functional range systems, I start every athlete with an FRA. And that's a non-negotiable. I start every non-athlete with an FRA. You can't work with me if we don't start with an FRA. So that's because that's our guiding light. That's our North Star. That just shows me everything that your body can and can't do. That's your individual capacities, range of motion, strength, tissue qualities, tissue extensibility. I learn so much about your body through an FRA, especially how we separate the linear path of the system and the rotational path of the body. I always tell people, I joke about it, but I kind of mean it. Like I could look at just your FRA right now, and I'll tell you what the next 6 to 12 months of your programming are. Just give me like an hour to write it all down, but I could show you what the next 6 to 12 months of your program exists. Especially if I know your sports, your injury history, all the different things, we can cover that pretty quickly. So what I do, and
so
I'll
again, I'm gonna jump in. So functional FRA stands for functional range assessment. That's the assessment that is utilized in the functional range systems in order to really create a three-dimensional understanding of the athlete's ability or the client's ability to move through three-dimensional space.
Yep.
So what's interesting to point out about the FRA as we're talking about this is that if I ask Hunter, if I asked you, for example, what's going on with her left big toe, you would, quickly run down into that FRA and you'd be like, this left big toe, has a deficit in passive range of motion of this. It has the ability to actively move into this. The person's ability to neurologically control that foot is this status, et cetera, et cetera. And then if I say, well, how about the right elbow? And there's answers. So pretty much you're taking a human system and you're breaking down all capacities with regards to the functionality of the joints, like you said, the stiffness or extensibility of the connective tissues, as well as the speed parameters of the muscular system. You're really getting an overall, we call it as you when you're explaining the physical. So
Yes. And
real.
that's still how I sell it to this day, right? So like I give that example. I say you go to the doctor every year and you get a physical done, but that's a terrible name for it because there's nothing physical about it. Really, they should call it a chemical, as we've said a million
Chemical.
times, right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
you're getting your blood serum levels, your cholesterol, your testosterone, vitamin D, and you're just comparing them to what as a society we've decided are these like normative levels. Like are you within this range, which is obnoxious range, but that's a conversation for another day. But are you within this range? Are you high? Are you low? And the only reason that information would ever be valuable, Dre, is if you get a physical every year, right? Because let's just say your cholesterol is a little bit high today, but you've never had a physical in your life and you're in your 40s. Like, what if this is actually the lowest it's been in 20 years because you have been making good decisions? So it's
Mhm.
hard to make any good decisions based off the physical if you don't collect data over time. When
Mhm.
somebody goes through the FRA and now they've collected all the information, however long it takes, they've collected everything, right? So now I know every single physical capacity of my client's body. I look at them and I say, do you remember what I said a couple hours ago? How this was the physical? Do you see how this is that? Like I measured all the physical capacities and now we have a snapshot of your body on today, which is 1/9/2025. And now what we do is we compare that to other numbers as time goes on. We're building a relationship here. So maybe your cholesterol's high today, maybe it's low, but what I care about is trends over time. Is are we moving things in the right direction? Now,
Mhm.
going back to your original question to me, is like, how do I use this? It's obviously used slightly differently for professional athletes for Gen Pop, but the answer is not really very different at all. It's just the timeline slightly different. But like for a professional athlete, like at the end of their competition season. So at the end of the Olympics, the last race of the year, she actually had one more after Olympics, but after the last race of the year, typically a vacation happens, a little time off. You just competed for X amount of months, but when you come back, your off season begins. So day one of the off season, we do an FRA, and the idea there is to see like what happened to your body physically this competitive year, which is another, like, to put it more plainly, what got worse? Because if you're competing at a high level, things get worse. That's just how it works. So
100%. And I hope everyone knows that
yeah,
the measurements that
it's
we
just the
the
reality.
measurements that we take preseason and postseason for any athlete, baseball pitcher, range of motion with regards to the forearm, elbow. I
Right,
mean, with the schedules that they undergo, there's going to be changes.
right.
Well, the extent of those changes are going to vary depending on the specificity of your applied stimuli, but we'll get into
Exactly.
it.
Which is
Absolutely.
what we're leading to, right? Because
Yeah.
like then what I do is I work with her for the entire off season, and I say her because we're talking about Sydney, but any athlete. And then I do it, but before I send them back off, whether it's to another state or another country or whatever else, now they're going back to the preseason and then going back to competition states. We do another FRA. Even if it's like not the entire thing, because the entire thing takes a long time, but like the main things we've been training this offseason, if it's just hips, just shoulders, just spinal segmentation, like we take another set of videos, another set of photos to kind of compare data, right? It's like getting another physical done to see how your blood work's doing at the end of a intervention. So we now compare, and what I do is I have a sit down with the athlete and I say, look at what we've accomplished in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. But I also care about how do you feel. So we start putting some objective measurements next to some subjectivity, and it's like, how do you feel? Well, my that thing that I was waking up with my low back is no longer there. My SI joint feels better. My knee's not bugging me anymore. And then we're starting to correlate that to like, and we also gained 10 degrees back of tibia internal rotation. Your lumbar spine was a one block at the end of the last competition season. We now have full segmentation back, and we're starting to see how some of the measurements that have changed from the FRA and how they feel. And then they go, oh my God, we really accomplished a lot this offseason. And then they go back to competition again. And then at the end of the competition season, we rinse and repeat, and you end up with years of data. So what we end up seeing is like this shift of health, right? Like their competition brings them this way in the off season. And I'm going to steal your words. I heard you say this at the very first FRC seminar I took in like 2014. It's a tug of war battle. There's sports tugging them to the right. And by the way, right is not good. So I'm going to tug them back to the left, right?
I mean,
And
that's a very important thing to note for people as well. If I think that there's a general belief in the world that athletes somehow are at a higher peak of health, and you have to be very careful what you mean by health, because you run your body to become an athlete. All this, yes, you're going to be healthy in a lot of markers, but with regards to physical health, the fact that almost any team that we've dealt with, every team we've dealt with, if we ask the trainers and the skills coaches, what injuries do you see? Or in this athlete, what do you think is going to be the next injury in them? The fact that they know the answer and that they can predict these answers tells you that sport is not a normal stimulus for the body.
right,
When you have like a
right,
chronic sport injury, it's, why did I get this? Why is this happening? Well, the answer is the sport. And
right.
we always say, like, as a baseball pitcher, for example, in nowhere during the evolutionary process of man, were you supposed to throw a projectile object at a prey, kill it, and then go grab the rock, run back 60 feet, and then throw it again thousands of times with different curves and different, knuckleballs. I mean,
Increasing velocity every
course,
time.
of course your elbow hurts. So that's a good point, is that, the damage that the in-season brings is a result of that sport. So as you're saying, you're getting these fluctuations of,
Right. So their sports pulling them this way. In off seasons, I'm trying to tug them back in this way. And a conversation I've had, which I've learned to speak very confidently because of working with you for so many years and working with different teams, is like, there's a good chance I'm not going to win this tug of war battle. Like, being honest, because your sport might be doing more, have a negative, it's pulling you further that way, then I can tug back this way because you're doing 9 months of that and I only have 3 months of this, right? But if we successfully play this tug of war battle, if we do it well, if we intelligently program in our off seasons, set people up for success, they have less issues to deal with during the in season. They have less chance of the nervous system faltering during their sports. We have more years with their sport. And, for a Gen Pop person hearing that, they go, yeah, but what does that mean? But for a $40 million arm in the MLB, that means everything to them and their family to have a few more years with their sport, right? So it's like a normal person would be like, if their elbow's bothering them, why wouldn't they just stop? It's, well, they're world famous for what they do. This is their identity. This is all they know. They've been throwing that ball since they were 3. Right. So it's like, if you can give them a few more years, they will do anything for that. Right. So the FRA allows us to just not waste time, right? Because that's the biggest problem, I believe, in our collective industry is like people are just like throwing darts at the wall and seeing what sticks. Try this exercise, try this. I saw this on social media. And the FRA is like, I don't have to try anything. You don't have hip internal rotation. Oh, that's weird because you need hip internal rotation for your sport. So there's a clear path forward here. I know exactly what to do. Right. Like it allows us, so I don't have to try things for the first month and then only have 2 months of success or off season. Day one of our off season is a productive session because I know exactly what to do with this athlete. We only have 3 months. We have to get started right now.
So for people listening, it sounds a little bit like we haven't really said anything specific as to what the difference is. But maybe if we talk about how we look at an athlete or how we look at the goals or the results of an FRA, and you were alluding to earlier that a lot of the reason for your success with these high level athletes is because they start to learn about themselves very quickly, because right off the go, the first FRA is done. When you have this discussion with them and you're showing them the data, you're showing them exactly what they are and are not capable of.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's amazing when if I'm doing an assessment on a client, and like something as easy as, let's start with a right shoulder car, and you have this right shoulder car, and I have my arm up, and you can see that my arm is straight and the rest of my spine is straight, and I'm not compensating to get my arm up. It just goes up into flexion. And then they do it. And then we have a video and we give them the video. We go, well, look, your arm doesn't flex. Okay, so here's might be the difference between the goggles or the lenses that we're taking. If you go to a trainer, and of course, trainers are great. It makes it sound like we're saying these people don't accomplish. No, there's a lot of good systems out there. But when you go to a trainer who's going to put through a training system, the assessment itself mostly gives you performance outcomes. You are able to bench this much. You are able to do this. When you squat, when you do, or whatever complex movement pattern I'm assessing, your knee dips in, or your knee, I don't know why I didn't turn that off. Your knee is externally rotated, or whatever the finding is. And then when we look at it, we're not looking at the objective, at the performance measures like that. We're looking at the actual shoulder. So
Right.
when you get a bunch of findings from a standard assessment, and then you just kind of go into training, the difference here is that when we get all these findings, we're looking at the findings with regards to the system that we're training, the system itself. I always say you can either focus on the patternization of the system, i.e. becoming a better athlete, becoming better movement, whatever, or you can focus on the system itself. So we just take a slight deviation at that one point where you make a decision. I have a finding, what do I do? And
Yep.
when we go the FRS direction, what we do is take that shoulder and then apply evidence-based strength and conditioning principles in order to try to specifically change the capacity of that shoulder in order to first bring it back to normal. And by normal, I mean normal abilities to attain range, or normal abilities to get to at least ranges that are what you use in your everyday life. What is the ability of the tissues to absorb forces, et cetera, et cetera. And then our training kind of focuses our energies into those findings, as you were saying.
Right. And that's one thing that could determine long-term success here. And going back to one of our first conversations is, does the team understand that? And that is something that, because like for the first 3 years, I think like now, like a lot of the sessions I have with Sydney, it's just like me and Sydney, and she just comes in, we train, we keep going, everything, etc. But like for years, her team would come with her. And part of that is earning trust and earning rapport. And like her performance director would be with her. She'd even have I'd meet other coaches. I'd meet manual therapists that she works with. Like they'd be like almost like a little entourage, right? And because of that, I'm not worried about that because I'm so confident in what we do. So it's not like I'm worried that people are watching and I'm unsure what to say. Like I pretend like they're not there. But then I can look at them and be like, do you guys see what I see? Like, do you see the lack of hip internal rotation? Do you see the fact that the ankle is dorsiflexion? I'm not talking about Sydney here. I'm just in general. And do you see that maybe this closing angle pain limitation could be consequential if you continue to press on it, right? For an MLB pitcher, right? Like, do you see why potentially maybe we should not just discuss this as a mobility system and internal training, that maybe what we're finding here also should be the guiding light in our external training and our standard model training. Maybe should be some decisions that should be made. I understand your athlete needs to be explosive, but do they need to be doing that Olympic lift? Because Olympic lifting is its own sport. So is that the best choice for shoulder explosivity, like that you're claiming it is, when they can't even move their joint in that direction pain free right now? So can we at least get some common language here? Can we see the same thing? And because they showed up, I actually saw that as such a positive thing, because it's like I don't have to now spend an hour and a half with Sydney and then call the performance director. Here's what we did today. Here's what I found. Here's what we worked on. We're all together. It's such a cohesive team in this scenario with Sydney that my work was much easier because we kind of spent a lot of time together for the last couple of years.
That's a good leeway leading into my next question is, like you said, you give these findings and then you turn to the person watching, the staff or whoever else is watching, and you say, do you see that? And then they go, oh my God, I do see that. And the funny thing that I've experienced in my career is that when you start to point these things out, the people watching have this light bulb moment where they say to themselves, it wasn't a hard thing to see, but why didn't I see that? What was it about, I've been working with this person for this amount of time. When someone asked about their left elbow, why don't I know what the
Yeah,
capacities of left elbows are? It's like, well, you assign exercises, and there's a spot there or a step there that's sometimes skipped where the exercises are being assigned because of a preconceived notion as to what the exercises are good for, as opposed as
100%.
opposed to deciding, is that particular exercise going to positively affect the person doing it? So it's almost like the goal of the exercise becomes second. It becomes primary in that the performance of the exercise is really why people assign the exercise. But then when you show them that you don't have a prerequisite capacity to allow you to do that exercise properly, then why would that exercise be assigned? Well,
Right.
and then an answer, well, I have to develop power in this.
It's always, well.
What is that? What do you mean by power? Like, what is power? And
Right.
you mentioned Olympic lifting. Do you really want to focus your time to discharging your power such that you're trying to explosively lift a bar over your head and then catch it in a particular way? Or would you rather take those efforts and put them into something that your sport actually requires you to do? Like, yes, there is something to say that some of your training, your max effort training, for example, you're going to pick these compound exercises and you're going to train them, not because necessarily it's sport specific, but because those exercises are used to harness capacity in the nervous system.
Right.
There's something to say that, but at the
Right.
same
And
time,
like I think it's once again an industry-wide problem, and I don't want to sound so negative about it, but I think everyone's going to nod in agreement as I say this, and you've said this before, but like if I say think of how many strength exercises do you know, and then you just start cataloging, right? Here's all the lower body ones I know. I know 20,000 bicep exercises. I know this. I know that, and then it's like, all right, how many power exercise, not powerlifting, but power exercises or rate of force development exercises People go clean,
yep.
snatch.
Yeah.
And like so
Yeah.
suddenly there's named three things from Olympic lifting. It's like that's it. Like what a limited worldview on power.
All of the exercises that in your example that you discussed previously, if you understand the idea that strength is speed and speed is strength, technically all those exercises are perfectly fine for the development of power. Another thing,
Right.
funny you say power. Power is this thing because power is always kind of like locked into this predetermined movement path, like you say.
Hmm.
Name me a power exercise, deadlift or snatch or clean.
Right.
But you can look at the development of power in the production of a movement pattern, or you can look at the development of power in a specific tissue that athlete requires. Let's take a swim.
Right.
You would want a swimmer to have, a really fast and hard pull into internal rotation during their stroke. So, is doing the snatch the best thing to do to develop power, or should you develop power in the subscapularis, for example's ability to internally rotate at that position?
Right.
Or
Right.
never even mind at that position, at any position, that
Right.
just
Have you
having,
ever trained it ever
yeah, like
independently like that?
that's what I'm saying. Like you're spending all of this. You said it earlier. I really like you said like adaptation currency. I think you're something like that.
Yeah.
Like you only have so much to spend, right? Like, and you have to decide. I'm going to do max effort. I'm going to do all of these power exercises, but you have to decide where these power exercises are going to go. Where are you
Right.
spending these currencies? So,
Yeah.
um, where was I going with that? We were talking about the FRA, and you get these FRA findings. So when you have the finding, you told the people that were watching, almost 100% of the time they go, yes, we see it, and yes, we think that is a concern, but we might not have thought about looking at the system in this way. So now that we have this concern, another problem that I find at that point is an inability for people to invent and create exercises needed to change that particular tissue capacity versus, like you said, trying to select from a bag of predetermined exercises that I use. I use
Yeah.
this exercise because it's good for, this or this, that, but what is good for developing speed of contraction of the subscapularis, or what is good for taking a hip that has no internal rotation and trying to make it internally rotate. What do you do? And then people go, well, squat. Well, okay, hold on. Because when you say squat, a squat is not for your hip. Your hip is used to squat. So when
Right.
you put someone through a squat program, you're not giving them that program to build a healthy hip. You're giving them a program to build a squatting hip. And the thing
Yep.
is, of course, as you know, with a squatting hip, if you take someone who focuses on squatting for a 6 to 8 week wave solely, if you were to take an FRA measurement of their hip pre and then post this desire to only squat and increase squatting, what you're going to find at the end is probably a better squat, but you're going to find a much more restricted hip because that's what the body does.
Almost always.
It gives you what you want. You clearly want to squat, but you're not telling me you want a hip on a frequent
Right.
enough basis. So I'm going to start
Right.
walling off, tissues and hone in on that pattern to the exclusion of other tissues. And then you end up with this devastatingly bad hip at the end of season, as you were alluding to before. When we were doing the pre
Right.
with our athletes, if you have that bad hip pre-season and then you go into season hard, that bad hip just continues to get worse. And then
Oh, every time.
the question again is that bad hip still doesn't have internal rotation. So what is it that you're doing? So maybe you can
Right.
take it off from here. When you have this finding from an FRA, what in the functional range system, like where do you go? What do you do generally? Like how do you think about these problems?
I'll start not even at that answer, but a communication thing, right? Because once again, there has to be a common language, a common understanding. I have to find an analogy or a metaphor to kind of make the person understand like what we're doing, why it's different. And so I've used this with some people with success, for other people it doesn't land. But I say like when you're just doing standard model training, so you're just doing the named exercises, I think of the body and its capacities almost like video game character stats, vitality, dexterity, strength. And you have like these lines, right? Like this bar is filled out strength, vitality, dexterity, and you have these staggered stats, right? Because different athletes have different focuses for their body in their training. And your standard model of training is just filling this bar and sometimes overflowing the edges, but it's really filling the bar. If it's overflowing the edges, that's when I'm dealing with an injured athlete or whatever else. They push these capacities far past the threshold of what the body could actually handle, right? Because the bench press is the most important thing in the world. And what we're going to do with internal training is I'm not here to fill your bar. I'm here to change where the floor and ceiling is. So I take this stat bar and I drastically pull it in other directions. So now when I meet you, is the strength that you have in your upper body is just the middle of this new stat bar that we're creating, which creates so much opportunity and potential to become a significantly better athlete. Right. And suddenly like eyes light up and they're like, well, that sounds good. And it's like, well, what you've been doing is you've been pressing on a limited shoulder. It's a limited stat bar. right? So yeah, you can keep pressing if you want. I'm not going to take that away from you. I wouldn't do that. If I was running everything, I'd probably take pressing out temporarily. But
Mhm.
we need to change the answer, because bench pressing is what's shrinking your stat bar, not growing it. So we need to take that floor down. We need to take that ceiling up. We need to change the potential of your body to be able to absorb and deal with forces as time goes on. And almost everybody, some version of that story makes a little light bulb go off, be like, okay, like I understand why we're doing this. I get that. That seems like something that has value to my long-term programming. And then
Mhm.
I believe your original question is like, what do you do? Like, the way that we teach functional range systems is it's a system of critical thinking, and the flow chart is a series of questions and answers. Right. So every line, I'm looking at the flow chart. I'm not looking past you, but I'm looking at the flow chart behind you.
Mhm.
And with the
Is the
flow
FRS
chart,
for those people who can't see or who are
yeah,
listening on audio, is pointing to the kind of the flow chart that we utilize to kind of guide our inputs and our decision making.
right. So as I fill out the FRA, every FRA question is linked to one of the lines on that flow chart. So is there sufficient passive range of motion for the task demands, or is there insufficient range of motion for the task demands? Is there maybe there's sufficient passive range of motion but insufficient active, or a passive to active gap? And if situation one versus situation two leads to a different box on the flow chart, the box on the flow chart is just an exercise category that's the best use of time for that joint right now, not forever, not for
Mhm.
everybody, but for this shoulder right now, where your passive is here and your active is here, and there's a 60-degree gap. Well, I can't just give you bench press for that. I can't just give you shoulder press for that. That is a very specific capacity requiring tissue to be in a very specific position if you want to change that answer over time. If we want to close this neuromuscular gap that you have, I know exactly what to do, because the question I asked on the FRA led to an answer on the flow chart. And now once again, there's no question that we don't have to waste time, because there's only one thing that's the best use of time for that box right now.
Mhm.
So I explain it like this, Dre. Even when I teach FRC, like really what the flow chart does so well is it amalgamates decades of information into a simpler way of understanding it, right? So like if you were to do your due diligence as a trainer, as a rehab professional, and study everything, read everything, right?
Mhm.
And then you start to look at what you call like the bird's eye view of the literature. You're looking at everything. You're like, okay, well, eccentrics do this well and do this well, but they don't really do that like we originally thought, and they don't do that. Concentric training does some of this, but not the same, but it does some of this, but it does this well, this well, this well.
Mhm.
Overcoming isometrics do very similar to this, but because of this adaptation, it actually does this better, this better, this better. Yielding isometrics, which is another kind of isometric, doesn't do the same thing as overcoming isometrics from a motor unit recruitment standpoint, but it does this really well. And then if you organize all the training and you say, okay, well, now that I've organized it and what it does well, and then you just draw lines between it with questions between them, that's the flow chart. Like that's it.
Yeah.
It's an organization of everything so that there's no questions left. So that if I see a finding in the body via the FRA, which is where I'm asking questions about what the physical capacities are, the answer becomes just what the exercise they should be doing, because that's how it's been organized. That's how we travel and teach this work.
That's right. That's right. That's so many good things about what you said there. I hope that that's helpful for people, because I think people often have this concept or this predetermined notion that the type of work that we do is somehow it's not secretive. It wasn't. I didn't develop it on a mountaintop, after an ayahuasca trip,
Your
doing.
beard was much longer.
Yeah, it was much longer than I went up. It was dark and then it was gray, and you know what I mean. That didn't happen. Actually, it did. But no, a lot of words that you said, like eccentrics and concentrics and various types of isometrics. There's literature out there that, when pieced together, provide a very beautiful story as to how to make selections of these types of training inputs based on what it is that you want. At the internal strength model, we often talk about there's only a limited number of ways to train, right? That
Mhm.
you're training, a tissue to failure, or you're training a tissue not to failure, or you're training
Right.
the tissue for speed, or like we're not inventing these terms, max effort, we're not inventing, but what we're saying is that when you look at these terms and when you look at what to do with these concepts, we're just specifically applying the concepts to the specific findings, such that we're creating a program that is um, a tissue specific program for that athlete. But
Yep.
like you said, that's not where it stays. It's the other thing that people
Right.
find weird. It's like a lot of people, they'll come to my social media and I'm doing cars again. And they're like, oh my God, like, is that all this is? You just do cars? Like, no, no. I'm not showing you the weightlifting. I'm not showing you
Right.
the other things that we're doing. I'm just showing you the things that that we're known to be doing. But
Right.
you know, all the training is the exact same. It's just you're focusing it. And I want to bring this back to what we were talking about before with mobility. You said a lot about, if somebody doesn't have the right passive mobility or sorry, passive range of motion versus active range of motion, et cetera, et cetera. Just for people listening, we know that it's a very important distinction. The ability to passively achieve a range of motion does not automatically allow you or grant you access to the ability to actively control that range or to absorb force through that range. So now if you take a limited range of motion, maybe that you found in the FRA, the hamstring, range of motion has gone down, which for a hurdler, that's a great example. Let's say the hamstring,
Totally.
you're going to be like, oh my God, I need to do something to increase this athlete's ability to move through space in such a way that the hamstring is allowed to elongate, and that all these things. So now you have a goal. So now you look at the person, you go, well, how do I get to that goal? And here's another big difference. Well, in standard model training, again, not to standard model like I'm insulting it, like it's all of the stuff in the standard model is the stuff that's guiding what we do. It's just a
Right. Right.
way you to harness this energy. But a standard thinking or thought process would be hamstrings not moving into flexion. Let's do something to make that happen. Either most likely focus on the hamstring. Okay. So we're just going to stretch the hamstring as much as we can,
Yeah.
or whatever else. But what we're saying is that lack of hamstring range of motion doesn't have to be solely because of the hamstring. Example, let's say you have a person who doesn't have a particularly good range of motion of their hip. Over time, injury, sedentary lifestyle, whatever it is, types of training, they've kind of honed that hip into a very limited amount of motion. I mean, once the hip itself has a limited amount of motion, meaning that the bones that make the joint are unable to move relative to each other very well. Well, when you take a hip, there's moving this way, this way, this way. When I move that way, well, this is where the hamstrings might be. So
Right.
is the hamstring the problem, or is the hamstring reacted over time to the fact that this ball and socket are not able to move independently? Once that ball and socket start to move together and you don't get this, so the hamstring can lengthen, you start to get this. Well, now over time, this hamstring doesn't achieve length through a period of time. And as you know, the body cares very little for these problems. The body's just trying
Right.
to conserve energy at any given time. So if you take a muscle and don't expose it to a full range of motion for a long period of time, guess what? The body goes, all right, forget that range of motion. Let's wall that
Right.
off. Let's change the structure of the hamstring based on the new information that I'm getting from that hip and the space that's available. All of the tissues are going to adapt to that. The body's doing whatever you're guiding it to do. So, like we said before, I have a limited hamstring range of motion and flexion. Well, in the FRA, you would probably go where? You have this linear problem, so I'm going to hand it off to you. Let's say I just say, I'm the coach. I go, you know what? This person has a limited hamstring range of motion. It's a problem. Obviously, you don't have enough information, but based on an FRA, what are you going to look at? How are you going to tackle this lost hamstring?
We're going to look at, I mean, this is funny because this is a conversation I have on a weekly basis. You're always going to come to me with something. My shoulder hurts, my lat is tight, this, that, my low back. But I'm not going to assess your shoulder. I'm not going to assess your low back. I'm going to bring you through a full FRA because I need to know everything about the joint that you are coming to me to see, but also the relationship of how it independently or doesn't independently work from the joints above and below it, so on and so forth. So just like you've said a million times, like I don't play the guru game. Oh, I knew it. The contralateral shoulder had limited range too, and that's why that's what the rest of the industry does, and it's nonsense. So it just turns out that if you also happen to have a limitation in the contralateral shoulder, sure, let's work on that because you shouldn't. but I'm not gonna draw that line between point A and point B. I don't think that line exists. So let's look at everything above. Let's look at everything below. Let's see what the limitations are. Let's compare them to the prerequisites of your specific sport or the task demands that you're going to be going through over the next 6 to 9 months. And do these two things line up? Do you have the hip that could do this? So in your example of like the hamstring being tight, I understand what a hamstring is. I've been studying the human body for 23 plus years. Like I get it. I know it. I see it. I can touch it. But it's a representation of the relationship of tension and how force is transmitted from the joint above it and to the joint below it. So if there's something fundamentally going wrong with the hip or fundamentally going wrong with the knee, we can start to look a little bit deeper. And in our system, your system, we always have these rules in place where we always, for every joint in the body outside of the spine, we want to look at rotational qualities before linear qualities. And the hamstring being limited, we would define as a linear quality. So I want to kind of take a telescope lens in or a microscope lens in to look deeper and look at, well, how is the fundamental joint motion of the hip? Does it actually rotate? Do those bones move relative to each other? And if not, I understand you're coming to me for a hamstring thing, but your hamstring attaches to the hip. Your hip doesn't move like a hip. So 99 out of 100 times, I can never be confident 100, but 99 out of 100 times, this is why we have such success with this system. It's why athletes continue to work with us year after year is I'm going to work on the hip. I'm going to forget that you ever said anything about your hamstring to me in the beginning, because we're eventually going to get to it. And we are going to make a hip. We're going to make that hip function like a hip should. We're going to make the knee function like a knee should. We're going to make the lumbar spine segment because it should if you want a healthy lumbar spine. After that, and that might take weeks, that might take months, depending on the starting condition, then we could bleed into everything else. The world opens up to us from a tissue specific perspective. Everything on the human body is trainable. We can continue to adapt it in any way we want. We can get stronger, we can get faster, we can lay down more connective tissue. All these qualities, we know how to do it now. But we have to start, there has to be some kind of system in place as to how we make our decisions. And for us, it's working with rotational stuff before linear stuff for the joints of the body that are not called spine. And that is,
again, I don't want to lose anybody here. So rotational, linear. A lot of people also hear this and they go, "Oh my God, these guys are just adding complexity where no complexity is needed." Well, to answer that, no, complexity is needed because that's why we tend to get the most difficult cases sent to us that have been gone everywhere and
right.
and things helped. So the specifics are important. But from a generic standpoint, I mean, people listening, if you think about it, the space that your joint represents a space, which is, as we describe, an opportunity to move. The more space you have in a joint, the more degrees of freedom that joint can express. So if you have a joint and the space of that joint is somehow smaller or less accessible, whenever you move that joint, the first bit of information that's going to be sent back to the nervous system about how that movement's going, the feedback, it's going to come from the tissues surrounding that space. Because when you move your shoulder, when you move your lumbar spine, the afferent receptors, the mechanoreceptors of your multifidus or of your deep capsule of your facet joint are going to be activated prior to the multifidus, and the multifidus will be activated prior to the next tissue superficial, and so on and so on. So if that deep tissue isn't functional, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If you have a reduced amount of space that doesn't allow you to move where you need to or want to move, then you just can't move
Right.
there. So often we say you can't move where you can't move, which
Right.
also means you can't train where you can't move. So when you're taking an athlete and you're saying, this person has limited hip flexion, if they don't have the prerequisite capsular space to allow the bones to move relative to each other, to allow that movement to occur, that's a problem. I mean,
Right.
that's a problem. Now, in the standard idea of mobility, you go, well, stretch the hamstring. Well, you can stretch the hamstring, right? And you do it for long enough. I mean, you're going to get somewhere over a very long period of time. But until you change that hip's quality, the information that hip is sending to the brain, that hamstring will always be responding to the information that's being sent. So even if you get that hamstring to quote unquote lengthen, which it doesn't, eventually, because the same signal's coming from that hip, it's going to shorten again. That's why
Right.
you have people, this was tight. I went to a therapist. They rubbed it. It felt better temporarily. Oh no, guess what? This has become tight again. It's because
Right.
there are qualities to the body. There are trainable qualities that don't automatically get trained just because you're exercising. You know what I mean?
Right.
Of course, you know what I mean, but I'm giving this to the audience. It's
Yeah.
another good example that I always use is, you have back pain, you have chronic back pain. We know the literature is quite clear on this, that you're going to get atrophy in your deep tissues, in your multifidi, for example.
Yep.
We know the type of atrophy you're going to get. We know that the slow twitch muscle fibers are going to atrophy much faster than the fast twitch muscle fibers. We know how slow twitch muscle fibers respond to exercise. We know the parameters. We know how much time under tension for how long is necessary in order to specifically stimulate these slow twitch fibers. We know all of this. I don't mean we. Everyone knows all of this.
The scientific.
We know these things. We know how to make decisions. We need more slow twitch. But what happens with a low back case is you have this injury, you have this problem, and then you have rehabilitation. And a lot of rehabilitation is focused on, getting the person to move again. Let's get them to out of pain. Then let's get them to do some, bird dogs. How many? Well, 12 by 3. Why? Because 12, I don't know, and 3. Like, just do 12 by 3.
Kind of two numbers that I've used my whole career.
And then when that gets, a little bit easier, I guess, then do more or use a different band. So this is kind of how it's dealt with. Now, and then when you feel better, guess what you do? You go right back into the gym, and then you start deadlifting, because your back feels better. And then along the lines, it hurts again. Okay, so at what point during that process did you go, oh no, your multifidus slow twitch fibers have atrophied? How do I increase the capacity of the slow twitch fibers in the multifidus specifically? Because when I go back to the gym and I deadlift, and you know how to deadlift, you go to the bar, you grab it, and you go, that's not slow, right? That exercise is not homogeneic in that all of the tissues involved in a deadlift are not getting the same type of stimulus during a deadlift.
Right.
Right. It's not like everything gets better all at once. You have to be specific, right? And the more specific you are, the faster the results. So we go back to this hip, and I know you've spoke about this before with your athletes, and I've noticed, and everyone else that I know that runs a system notices, with that lack of hip flexion, if you just took your time, like you said, to focus on that hip, and you gave the hip more space, how? We'll talk about that in a second. Just put a pin in that. Then what ends up happening is you go back to check the linear problem of your hamstring isn't, you don't have enough range of motion, and it's already better, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes the problem is almost gone, right? Because now you have this hip that allows that range to occur. Now, of course, the problem is you haven't used that range in a long time. So now we have to kind of talk about how do you control that? And that's one of the differences between flexibility and mobility. If you don't have a range of motion, let's say in that hamstring, or you don't have length, and then we do something specifically after we clean the hip, let's say that we did the hip, did that, and now we're like, okay, let's get into that hamstring. So now we have a hamstring that over time has not been exposed to full length. You have connective tissue changes, neurological changes, muscular changes that are related to whatever length it was allowed to get to, but any further length is not allowed. So now you start to put in this stimulus to try to get length. Right off the bat, this is where we differ from mainstream. Passively stretching that tissue over time might creep you to a better range of motion. But just because you have that new range, if you don't go backwards and backfill that range with neurology, the ability to control that range, then the range that you're getting access to is by definition dangerous, because you have a range of motion for which you have a complete inability to absorb force.
Right.
And what does everyone say? Strength is what really prevents injuries. But if I give you a new range of motion, but I don't pile strength into that range of motion, and then you have to absorb force during the use of that motion, your yoga flexible pose that you were doing for that, that's not what that's for.
Right.
And again, as you're alluded to, we're basing these decisions not based on, magic this or magic that. We're
Right.
basing it on on the scientific literature. If strength decreases the chance of tissue being injured, and if tissue gets injured when the load on the tissue exceeds the load bearing capacity, well, then in order to protect yourself against injury, you have to be able to generate force, right? And if you
Yes.
have no experience in a range of motion, your experience generating force in that range is limited, you know?
Yes.
And another problem, now that I'm ranting, is when people do have the concept that I increased the range of motion, but now I have to take that newfound flexibility and create mobility out of it by giving the nervous system experience with it so that it can move there actively. Well, that's good too. I mean, a lot of people will do that and then they'll start doing activation exercises or whatever. But you can't just activate a range of motion. You have to
No.
train the range of motion because, at any given time in this newly acquired range, you might have to exert, 20% of your neural drive in order to, tackle someone passing you. Or maybe that person's way bigger than you and you have to put 80% of neural drive, or you have to contract at a very specific speed. And the body, as we know, is specific to its training. So if you didn't practice that zone with the speed that you are going to encounter on the field, then you just didn't train for that stimulus. And that's
Right.
why it's occurring, right?
Right. And then think like this is like a studyable thing in the human body, like going back to someone like Sydney hurdling, like the landing mechanics and the percentage of your body weight that is increased to go that the force that has to be absorbed on each landing, right? So like she hurdles over and just think of plyometrics and forget Sydney, like just a box jump, right? Like by landing down into your body weight, it's not just your body weight you're catching. Since you're going down at a certain speed, there's a certain percentage multiplied times your body weight that you'd have to absorb. And if the only thing you've ever done is stretch into these ranges of motion that are required to get into the positions of landing mechanics, and you've never increased load bearing capacity, it's a recipe for disaster, right? And that's what people realize long term, is that just having the range of motion isn't enough, which is something that like the internet completely misunderstands, as we expect. That we're not just increasing people's range of motion for the sake of increasing range of motion. We're increasing people's range of motion and then backfilling it with control and then backfilling with strength and making them more resilient and increasing load bearing capacity. And not to the point of no return, just to the point that they need, plus a small buffer on top. Like the whole point is to meet the individual where they are and get them the capacities they need. And every single person is going to be different. Like Sydney is a unique hurdler in the sense that I actually have to train her a little bit differently than I train other hurdlers, because she is a rare breed. We already know that, but she alternates her hurdling leg. Almost every hurdler out there has a lead leg and a hurdle leg, and it's just the same thing their entire life. At one point in her career, she decided to alternate. It makes her stride very special. It's completely changed her running dynamics because of that. But that I now have to look at that. I have to know that. I have to understand that. And when I'm looking at the FRA, there's no longer just a lead leg and a hurdle leg that I have to manage. They're both legs are both, right? So it's treating the person like an individual, understanding how this person plays their sport. What if it's a baseball player? What position do they play? What positions they're getting into? All of that has to go into it. It's not just random decisions for baseball, random decisions for track and field. It's how does this person do it? What does this person need? How are they going to accomplish their sport? What is the task demand? And then filling the point A to point B with just logical training decisions from the flowchart.
I think what you've alluded to, I was going to ask you this question, and the question was, why is there such a variety of people that this works on? Like, I've been very, very lucky to be able to work with athletes all around the world, but a variety of athletes, not just bendable. I know that you do
Yeah.
you do Cirque du Soleil athletes
Yep.
and athletes, performers, athletes, same thing.
Yep.
And we work, but then you work with baseball players, and then a soccer player says, "Oh, you know what, this really works for me," and then an elderly person goes, "You know what, I couldn't get out of a chair before, and now I can." So you alluded to this with the idea of the specificity, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about why does it not matter where you're coming from? I mean, online, comments online, they're great, but
Right.
there's a lot of people like, why would you do this shit? No, this is bullshit. I train, I get up at 5 in the morning. I don't know why, but I get up at 5 in the morning and I'm out there and I don't have time for, putting stimulus into my hip. I gotta lift, I gotta deadlift, I gotta, um, but
I
we,
also have two herniated discs. I also can't
well,
look
yeah,
left. My knee
yeah,
hurts.
yeah, 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 yeah. When the microwave goes on, I shit myself and forget who I am for 20 minutes. But yeah, but yeah, there's that. But there's also like, but we work with powerlifters, right?
Right.
So I can work with a powerlifter, 300-pound powerlifter, and then I can work with a 100-pound gymnast, and it doesn't really matter
No.
because no matter if the powerlifter doesn't have a hip, and if the gymnast doesn't have a hip, they both require particular capacities in their hip. And if they don't
Yep.
have them, that causes problems. Now, it
Right.
might differ into how I attack that hip, but that's only because they have different hips, right?
Right.
But a funny thing about the training is that the intensity is what gets people. You know that
Yep.
people click on, I'm doing an exercise, I'm working like as hard as I can, throwing up, sweat everywhere. I love that. Everyone's clicking like. So intensity is important, but we say that too, right? And when people do
Yep.
ability training, they think that we're just doing these
Right.
cards and then we're doing some red banded work but no, we're all of my athletes do max effort work, all of them in season, out of
100%.
season, 100% of the time. We can get into that later. But you know where else they're putting maximal amounts of effort into the training of their right hip?
Right.
If I want to change the quality of the tissue in the right hip, it doesn't change if I'm trying to change the quality of my quad. So, I have to work hard. If I want to change the quality of my hip capsule, I'm working very hard. And when people
Right.
see us doing tails and rail sets, which is something that we use to try to, initially garner a new range of motion that we can then backfill with training, we're doing max efforts. Like
Right.
we are redlining the nervous system, but not to increase the squat,
Yeah.
to increase the stimulus into the hip in order to drive a particular capacity. So what you do not lose with your training or with functional range systems is intensity.
Right.
You don't lose the intensity, nor do you lose the qualities that you already have. And that's another thing that people think is that we get our whole hand on athletes and we're just going to erase what they do and we're just going to completely go into very slow methodical movement drills. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're you know like I said, we're doing max effort lifting, we're doing hypertrophy training when is necessary, but we're doing the hypertrophy training for the things that we determine require hypertrophy. What's an
Right.
example of that? Rotator cuff. When was the
Right.
last time your last client put a 6 to 8 week wave or a 4 to 6 week wave into specifically trying to increase the fast twitch muscle hypertrophy in the rotator cuff? And when you ask a question like that and you don't have that answer, the answer is probably the last time they got injured, because you'll notice when
Right.
you injure your shoulder that everyone, bench press, overhead press, lateral raises, as soon as you hurt yourself, you're back to TheraBand red. And what are you training?
Right.
Rotation. Why? Oh, because the rotator cuff is important. Well, if it was important, then
Should have trained it before you got
yeah,
hurt.
where's the training, right? And this brings me to another point is that, well, then, there's not enough time in the day. If you guys are talking about this specific training, you can't train everything all the time. And that's what we're saying. And that's why I
Right.
think people get confused. So let's just structure this a little bit so that people listening who might not have experience with this type of training might understand that we're not pulling things away from you, and we're not training differently than everyone else. We're just focusing differently. If you have, let's take a sprinter, and you say, how much should a sprinter be able to squat? There's an answer to that question, right? There's a general range where if you say, what is the average squat, max effort squat for an Olympic level sprinter? I mean,
Right.
it's gonna fall. It maybe a man's gonna be, 1.5 to 2 times body weight.
Exactly. There's a
Girl might
range
be
from a
1 to
percentage standpoint.
1.5. Okay. So if you're using max effort training, which we use, conjugate methodology and Westside Barbell, shout out to them. But if you're max effort training, to take an athlete to 1.5 body weight in a squat using max effort training, it doesn't take a long time, right?
No.
Like if you let's think about this. I have a wave. I'm going to try to increase my absolute strength in my squat. Okay, so you can do max effort work, in between. There's got to be about 48 to 72 hours. So let's say that you're going to do your max effort work for the squat Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, something like that. Each time you do that, it's not hard to PR in those incremental steps. Let's say you do a
Right.
3 week, you push in, maybe take a 1 week deload, 3 weeks back on to get to that 1.5 time body weight or 2 time body weight. It doesn't take a long time, especially if you're not dealing with nagging injuries, especially
Right.
if during the time that you're not working on that, you're maintaining the joints capacities, you're keeping them healthy, you're stimulating tissue on okay. So getting to that. So if an athlete, a sprinter comes to you and they go, well, we need to get her to or him to 1.5 time body weight or 2 time body weight. The problem is, number one, most people don't think about it that way. People think that
No.
strength is just that you can just keep going. Like
Infinite.
if you have a sprinter, just 500 pound, 6 times body weight, that's not true. You only
Right.
need as much strength as you need, and then you need
It's a
to,
point of diminishing returns.
and then there's a point of diminishing returns. And then when you take that amount of strength that you have, then you have to think about the speed repertoire that you can execute within that strength. That's what builds the
Exactly.
athlete, as we always say. An athlete is a repertoire of speeds and the ability to discharge forces at certain speeds. But
100%.
to say that the person, so let's say they're using max effort method Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, they're going to get to that 1.5, 2 times body weight relatively quickly. And this is where people get confused. It's like, okay, so how long did it take to get there? How long was the training session? Well, let's say you come in, you warm up, you do a warm-up set of the squat, you do another set to acclimatize yourself to and then you go for your max.
Yeah.
So how long did that take? Those
Not
10
long.
minutes. I mean, that's 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes of your time.
Right.
So what are you doing with the rest of the time? You know what I mean? So that you're working out for an hour, probably a long time, but so for 50 minutes. Now, what are you doing? Well,
Right.
I'm doing, you just squatted. Well, I have to do leg extension, I have to do leg curl, I have to do this, well, what are you trying to do here? Are we trying to increase hypertrophy in the musculature of your leg? Because we're talking something different here. We're trying to build performance. So you have this max effort ability. And once you get to it, once you have the absolute strength for the athlete that you need, how often do you have to train that? Once or twice a month, you have to hit that max and you'll kind of hold that ability. Now, what is that ability? When you get an absolute strength measure to where you want it, what you're saying is you've trained the nervous system to be able to discharge an enormous amount of energy. And then once you have that ability to discharge the energy, now you take that ability and you filter it down into your tissues and you start to make rapid changes because of your ability to utilize the nervous system. But these absolute strength measures, make no, about it. This is just training for the central nervous system. That's what that is.
Right.
So did you run into that as a problem? Like, did they like, this is going to take forever to do, or how did you manage?
No, I mean, it's a problem I encounter with every athlete I work with ever. How it's solved is different per person or per team and everything else.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to answer a different question, but it's kind of the same thing, which is like, I'm going to say the overarching question is like, how do we get people to spend the right amount of time on this stuff compared to like what they were doing before they meet us, right? Like that's a similar question. And, I heard you explain it like this a very long time ago, and I've adopted this, which is like, I work with adults, I don't work with kids, so I can't make them do anything. And I've recognized, I've tried.
You can't make kids do anything either.
I say, if I say to an athlete, you need to do this, I mean, like it does. I hold no weight because there's no trust, there's no rapport built yet, right? You met me, and I'm the professional in the mobility field, but to say you need to do this many times per week, and you shouldn't do these other things, like that doesn't go over well, right? So what I do is taken from you is like I say, like, let me see your training week. Like, what are we working with here? Like, oh wow, you're spending 18 hours of the week on exercise. How much of that time can I have? Like, you're hiring me, so I imagine you want to put some time towards this. How much of your training schedule can I have? Because we can't just place this on top. Like, you're already redlining, you're training 18 hours a week. We can't just add another 4 hours to that, 6 hours to that, whatever else. So what percentage of your time can I have? And then, like, if an athlete says you could have 30 minutes on Friday, it's like, I'll take it. But now we have to manage our expectations. Like, what can I do with 30 minutes of your time? That's all you're going to give me. We'll start there, though, right? So the goal is to take what time they're willing to give me, try and find the biggest rock, the most bang for your buck, hip internal rotation, lumbar spine stability. Like, what's the thing that's going to make them realize, oh, wow, there's something here. This is important. And then allow them to slowly ask for more time over time. Like when they realize, oh wow, just 30 minutes on Friday makes my back feel so much better. My knee already feels better. What would happen if I actually took more of Hunter's advice? So I kind of just instead of trying to force feed, I just kind of try this. Let's see how this goes. And every single time, the person eventually says, like, okay, let's spend a little more time on this. If you give them the big rock, they want more. So like even with Sydney, like when I first met her and I brought her through her first FRA, I still approached it like, hey guys, like this is what needs to be done. But I only saw Sydney like once every couple of weeks. Like this is many years ago. And I only saw her once every couple of weeks. So I didn't have much time with her. When I would ask her, are you doing the homework? It was like, I got a couple of things in this week, but I didn't do it every day, cars, whatever else. And then year two, she comes in and she goes, and she says this, she goes, I want you to talk to me like I've never heard this before. I'm ready to take this more seriously. I know this is what I need. And she's talking about her team. Like, we know this is what I need. Yeah, 100%. And it's like, I want to start back at square one as if this is the first assessment. Just talk to me like I haven't heard this stuff before. I want to understand it. I want to move forward. So there's already more buy-in. Like I gave her a little bit the season before, and it was listened to a little bit, and then already from that little bit there was noticeable improvement. So it's like, all right, now let's take this seriously. And then it turned into, now I'm seeing you every single week. It's not every couple of weeks, but now I'm seeing you every single week. And then more time goes by, and I see Sydney in her off season. And at the end of this off season, which is I think year 2 or year 3, she goes, well, our races start next week and I have to start running. And so this is technically starting the in season. So off season's ending this week. Normally we just take a photo, see you next year, have a good one, goodbye. And she goes, is it okay if I come in next week? Basically saying like, I actually want this included in my in season as well. So at first it was just like every couple of weeks, then it was every single week in the off season. Then it grew into, I want to train this every single week in the off season, and I want to do it in the in season. And now after the Olympics this year, she's like, I want to aim for 3 times a week. We'll at least get 2, but let's put on the calendar 3 and we'll reorganize. So going back to the story, it's like, I don't try and tell people what to do. I just say, what are you willing to give me? And then we kind of grow from there. Because if you could, with the FRA, identify the biggest rocks and really give that person what they need, almost always it works in such a powerful way where they go, if just that little bit makes me feel so much better, I wonder if I would allocate more of my resources towards that, like what would really happen. So, with Sydney, my relationship has grown so much because she's really recognized the value of this work, that it's no longer just mobility training. She knows that. It's no longer just off-season training. She knows that. This is now a year-round thing. If I was to text her right now and say, did you do your cars this morning? Her response would be, of course, right? So she goes into it. And then another thing, from a buy-in perspective is I don't treat Sydney like an athlete, in the sense that like a lot of athletes just kind of get told what to do and their coach tells them what to do. I treat her like a colleague. I treat her like a human who's interested in understanding her body better. And I treat every athlete like this. So I teach them the system, but instead of, and once again, I heard you say this for the first time ever many years ago, but instead of in 2 8-hour days, just in 90-minute chunks, right? Like they get everything just in pieces. And one of my favorite things about Sydney for the last year is she's now coming in with such confidence about how her body works and how this system works and what we're working on is like you. I have like 3 whiteboards up in the gym. There's whiteboards on every single wall. And I'm constantly, when I have people come in, when I have athletes come in, when I have a team of people come in, I'm writing, I'm drawing, I'm doing all the, the force length relationships and speed strength graph and all the different things. I have everything up everywhere. And she comes in and she looks at the whiteboard and she's like, you were telling somebody that they weren't getting to the strength training adaptations from an intensity perspective, which is why there's a bunch of dots over here. She goes, and really their volume is too high. So what they need to do is they need to cut their volume down and they need to bring their intensity this way. I was like, oh my goodness, yes, that's exactly what I was saying.
Champions are champions for a reason, man.
Right. And then the next day she comes in, like a couple days later, she looks at my whiteboard over here and she goes, oh man, you had someone with a bad spine today. Their lumbar spine wasn't moving at all. Cause I have like a segmenting spine drawn out and then the bottom of it's just a straight line. And she's like, that must have been a real bad lumbar spine. I bet you they learned segmentation today. I was like, oh my goodness, yes. Like that's exactly what we went over, because she has an interest in understanding this. She's not just here to work out. She's not just showing up, clocking in, clocking out, doing exercises. She wants to understand the why behind it. She asks questions. A turning point a long time ago is when she came to me and she goes, okay, well, now that we're taking this more seriously, like, can you look at my warm up? Like, I know you're in the gym, but this is on the track, but can you look at my track warm up and just see if does this vibe well with how you think a warm up should be done? Like, it's a slow process. This didn't everything I just listed happened over years, not in year one, but it's because I believe what our system does well is effectively finding the big rocks. Find the thing that gets the buy-in, find the thing that's going to move the needle. And there's nothing that does that better than starting with just the assessment and comparing that to the prerequisites of their activities.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gets better in time because then you start to get more and more feedback from your athlete or from your client. The feedback, as you've learned, as you see, it starts to become more specific. Now there's, what, during my cars, I had a closing angle pain here, or, I was doing my reactive strength training and I felt this, and then I went down and I checked my rotation and I felt a pinch or I felt a closing angle thing here. And then they start kind of, and then it becomes great because then you start to feed off of your client. And then there's this relationship of we're really managing the system. Like Sydney is a lot of great things, but at the very basic, she's a system, right? She's a system that needs to be managed. And in the system, you need to manage the components of said system. These systems, this complexity of these systems emerge from the basis of their parts. So you have to maintain, if you want this system to function, the individual parts that coalesce to form the system must be maintained. Just exercising the system and doing things with the system is not specific enough to maintain the specific components of that system that then emerge. I said system a lot, but
take a shot every time Dre says system.
I think yes. I think you got the gist. So so she came in, did you also do a one-on-one kin stretch with her, or how did that work?
We've occasionally done a session like that. Like last year was a unique year, one being an Olympic year. Everything was like, okay, like every no time can be wasted. Everything has to be like, we have to be careful here. I want to make sure that I'm not fatiguing her before she's going into a hurdle day with her. She's got one of the best track and field coaches in the country kind of running her running stuff. And I've met him and had conversations with him. And I want to make sure that he's never thinking like, wow, Sydney saw Hunter again yesterday and she's running slow today. This is a problem. So like, I'm always being very cognizant of making sure that our stressors aren't clashing and that we're doing the right thing. So our off-season training is a lot more FRC, ISM, one-on-one specific based off of the FRA. Last year being the Olympic year, and it's really where she spent a lot of time with me during our in-season as well. Like in between races, I was seeing her, like she's racing this Saturday, and I got to see her in between. I'm like, let's just do a GPP session, right? Like I don't want to overload you. I don't want to do a bunch of pails rails. You're competing again. You're still recovering from the last race. We're just going to do like a little GPP session, just some general qualities of hip, knee, ankle, spine stuff. Keep things. It's all things that are complementing what our program calls for, but in a less specific and on some days specifically less intense way, so it was not as demanding on her system to affect her recovery from there. But yeah, we've done some one-on-one kin share sessions as well.
Okay. And then GPP, for the people in the audience, general physical preparedness, which, I mean, that's another conversation. But funny enough, in our industry, it's a concept that is theoretically understood, but in practice, doesn't seem to be well practiced, and that people really don't know what they're focusing on.
Poorly applied.
Poorly applied. You know, in our system, you can look at GPP and people will say, you know, you have to maintain their flexibility, and you have to maintain their strength, and you have to maintain their power, and you have to maintain their balance. But the way we look at this is all of these things I've listed are all qualities that emerge from underlying anatomy. Like
Yep.
your ability to balance is dependent on some anatomical function that allows
Right.
balancing, just like your ability to execute power, or your ability to execute strength, or your ability to be flexible. These are all how should we say this, anatomical byproducts. So
Yep.
rather than focus on the ability to maintain those emergences, we say, let's just focus on maintaining the actual tissues that will then come together to create that quality, or to create that emergent behavior that is strength or that is power. So, you know,
Right. And just think about, like, once again, just to reinforce what you're saying, like training the emergences versus training the determinants, the training the biology, training the anatomy. Like, if somebody, like, because people ask me a lot after the Olympics, like, what do you do with Sydney? It's like, you know what I don't do? Practice hurdling with her, because she's the world's best at that. We're not practicing the emergence. Like, she's already the world's best. There's nothing I can say from a human language standpoint that could or should alter the way that she's doing that. You know what we can do, though? We can keep that hip as healthy as possible. We can keep the knee as healthy as possible. We can keep that ankle as a high force absorption machine, you know, that she needs to
I'm
work
gonna
with.
jump in there because it's important, because there was a distinction there in the three examples you use, whereby the first two, you were discussing health and longevity of the system components, and the last one, you were discussing a performance measure. So that's another key point here, is that we apply our specific inputs in some regard to maintain or to bring back the quality of health back to a joint.
Yep.
But then once that quality is there, well, now because we're focused on tissue specific training, we get to decide what qualities to push that would then create a better emergence of movement for that athlete. So
Yep.
an example, we went to, like, I forget which team we were at, but they were talking about this hamstring problem that they had. They kept pulling their hamstring or whatever. And then you go through their training and you go, well, what part of your training is dedicated specifically to trying to prevent hamstring problems or tearing? And then, well, we do hamstring curls, or we do squatting, or we do, whatever else that is. And when you break that down a little more and you go, well, no, let's unpack this. If you have a bunch of hamstring tears, probably, well, most of those injuries are occurring in the connective tissue, the white stuff in that hamstring. So what are you doing specifically to increase the ability for the white stuff, the connective tissue, to absorb force? Because that injury is occurring when a force is being put through that hamstring, either internally or externally, that is exceeding the ability to absorb in that connective tissue. So what are you doing specifically for the connective tissue? And this is where we get back to the literature. There are answers to that.
Right.
There's
these aren't questions that are unanswerable. These
no,
are very answerable questions.
You train to length, you train at length, you look into isometrics and eccentrics, and how length stimulates this increased amount of connective tissue architecture. Like, the information's there. In practice, it's like, where is that
Not
way
being applied.
where you did only white tissue training? When I say only, of course, red is muscle, white connective. It's not only white, but where did you focus?
Right.
Where did you focus that time into improving the quality of the hamstring that you're telling me you have a problem in? Like, let's take now let's go back to sprinting. Like, if another sprinter who is a fan of Sydney, who is probably every sprinter in the world, is listening to
everyone,
what can you do for a sprinter? Like, let's say that the sprinter comes in and they say, oh, you do your FRA and miraculously their ankles are fine, their knees are fine, their hips are fine. It doesn't happen. that,
Right.
I mean, sometimes, I mean, I've had the odd athlete that's like, wow, are you a
So rare.
dancer or an athlete? But, you know, if that ankle is fine, I mean, when you're training a sprinter, you need reactive strength, of course, in the posterior
Yep.
complex of the posterior leg into the plantar fascia. You need your intrinsic foot strength. You need all of those things. So how can we specifically increase her ability to make use of that potential to kinetic transfer when she's pushing it to the floor? Well, you know, if you can specifically tell me that this stimulus, when applied over a 6 to 8 week period, will increase the density of the connective tissue of the
100%.
plantar fascia coming around the calcaneus into the Achilles tendon, into the triceps surae groove. If you're telling me that there is, you know, a way to stimulate that tissue to specifically improve the quality of the connective tissue, well, then I'll take an athlete whose muscles are going to function the same as they did before we did this training, because we're going to keep those qualities. But at the end of that phase, if I give them more stiffness in their connective tissue, now their muscle, which is really just the speed gauge as to how fast you're going
Right.
to contract, that muscle gets to pull against a stiffer and more dense, more organized connective tissue. What does that mean on the back end? It means you get to make more use of the potential to kinetic energy transfer. If you put X amount of newtons into the ground and you want that X amount of newtons to propel you forward, if you're losing newtons based on tissue quality, based on
100%.
lack of ability to utilize ranges of motions to alter where the tissue, the stressors go, you're going to lose performance points. Like, so what we're
This was a
for an athlete listening, for a track athlete, a sprinter, we're not just talking about making the joints feel nice, loosey-goosey, make them healthy. We're specifically trying to push qualities that
yep.
will you can utilize in
Yep.
performance while always considering the health and longevity, which
Right.
you can do simultaneously, getting back to what we
100%.
talked about before. So you want to talk about that? Like, what's the mentality when you're trying to push a physical quality for performance? Like, how do you do that alongside this conceptual framework of caring about her when she retires, caring about the health of the joints doing the work, caring about the longevity of this system as a whole?
Yeah, and the whole framework, the whole thing only makes sense is, once again, I have to say it, is if we're actually keeping track of things and measuring. Because this is something that, like, it sounds so obvious, but so few people do it outside of the standard KPIs, key performance indicators of, okay, well, now that we're in the off season, what's her squat? What's the bench press? What's this? Like, everyone has like these KPIs as like what they check for their athletes off season versus in season. Like, are they stronger or not? But they're not keeping track of anything else.
Mhm.
So if we're going to make a decision and it's like, okay, if this was painful at the end of the competition season and it's not painful now and you restored capsular function, but you're only checking how strong the squat is, you're not going to keep track of if that's getting better or not. And those are things that can play into health and longevity. Is the pain gone? And do you have your capsule back? Do you have your workspace back? Like that, these are things that we can keep track of, right? Like if I video your cars every quarter, we can see how your workspace is changing over time. So it's one of those things where we have to assess, we have to identify where we are in the overarching theme of the year. Are we in competition season or off season? Are we ramping up? Are things, should we put all of our currency towards just competing and resting for the days between? And if we're in a season like off season where we can really aggressively change capacities, then it's just picking a handful, because anyone that does this well knows that you can't just make everything better at once. Like, that's something that a lot of people tried and it just doesn't go well, right?
It's a huge point. Like, and
Right.
again, we always talk about this. There's only a certain amount of time. There's only a certain amount of nutrients available. There's only a certain amount of adaptive capacities of tissues. And if you're telling me that you're increasing lean muscle mass and also increasing power and also in all of the joints and all of them all of the time, you're exceeding, or you think too much of yourself, because
Right.
you need to, you know, as we know, ecological training and trying to maintain the ability for the nervous system to drive and the ability for the muscles to contract at various speeds and the ability for the connective tissue to absorb forces, the ability of the joint spaces to allow for these ranges of motion. I mean, these things all have to be, they have to be balanced, right? And you
Yep.
can't say I'm going to increase all of these qualities simultaneously,
Right.
because as we said, if you're doing that, you're probably doing a lack of justice to each one of them, because there are
Right.
specific ways to attack each one of those things. So a better way to think about training is you're taking these qualities, and as you achieve, you're trying to put a pin in that quality or capacity as you're trying to raise another one higher, and then you're putting a pin in there and then raising another one higher. What we're not doing is letting anything fall, right?
Right.
Um,
Another visual I like to give versus the putting a pin in it. It's like that sketch, whether it's an actual person or a cartoon, where like the guy has plates on sticks and he has to spin them to keep them up from crashing.
oh yes,
Right. Like
yeah.
programming is like, okay, for this phase, I'm going to spin this plate, hip internal rotation,
Yeah.
maximum strength, this, that. And these plates are starting to slow down and wobble, but I can't let them fall. That is detrimental to my athlete's progress. I cannot let these fall. So then phase two, we're switching to these plates, and I'm going to try and maintain the speed of these plates, but they might fall a little bit because that's how physiology and anatomy works. But now I'm going to focus on this, focus on this, focus on this, and try and bring these up. And real good programming allows me to keep all these plates spinning, and it allows me to slowly bring these qualities up. And then, yeah, some things fall because that's how the world works. But are the things falling a detriment to the program? Probably not, because the things that are falling are things that athlete didn't need anyway, like bench press for the baseball player or Olympic lifting for someone who's not an Olympic lifter. Like, yeah, you might become a worse Olympic lifter, but it's cool because that wasn't your sport anyway. So it works out. It's okay that plate slows down a little bit, but look at how much better your hip is. Look at how much better your knee is. Look at how much faster you are. Like, all these other things are improving.
I love the analogy, and I'm gonna push it a little bit further in saying, and I'm not, we can't go over all the details of this, but each one of those plates also don't spin at the same speed.
Correct.
Okay, so, and that's another thing. Let's take, for example, like speed. I mean, speed is something that you lose fast, right? So speed things should be hit almost weekly. Like with most athletes, the things that they have to accomplish fast need to be trained for speed specifically more frequently than, say, a max effort lift. If you have a max effort lift and you have your 1.5 time body weight or 2.5, whatever your goal is, once you got that, you don't have to do it very often, right? You just have to
It's easier to maintain it than to get it.
Remind the nervous system. But with regards to speed, that plate is wobbling a lot. So you have to kind of like keep the other ones going, but that speed one, you always have to do one. Oh, get that speed one going, and that's a big difference. You have to know how fast those plates are spinning, and that's something that we try to really emphasize. That all of the tissues of your bodies were formed utilizing different force profiles, and therefore the way you manage them, the force profiles in terms of how much tension, how much time you're putting under tension, frequency, those profiles change depending on the specific tissues, the specific qualities that we're trying to achieve. But I love that idea of the spinning plates. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Let's get back to Sydney. There was one moment that this is not going to really help with management, but there's a picture that a lot of us have seen where after she won her gold medal in Paris, she came over and gave you a hug, and there's this like you're both have your arms in the air. It's a beautiful picture, but I'm interested in if you can put to words, for her, it's something that someone like me will never know what that feels like to win a gold medal.
Sure. Right.
Now I've been around my athletes that have won medals, so there's a feeling you get that's not the same. I don't know. I can't compare because I only.
I understand.
It feels incredible. Well, what did that particular moment feel like? The fact that she was there, she did it, and then she came and found you. Like, you're part of that. You're a small. You know what I mean?
Small part. So I have no problem admitting a small part.
Funny, before you answer, I will point out to the audience that oftentimes when we're training or we're at seminars, I always remind people, I'm like, let's not pretend that you're the reason why your athlete is great. Okay. Like, your job is more to get, your athlete's body out of the way so that their
Right.
athleticism can be displayed. But I mean, let's
Right.
not go crazy here. But it's an important part nonetheless, and I'm not downplaying the important. But what did that feel like, man? Like,
Yeah. Well, I'll just speak on the thing you said for a second. Like one of the things that I've said so much on my social media, because I just don't think it's admitted enough by our field, is like whenever I share a real good testimonial, like someone who's like, just in the movement world, like a one arm handstand, finally pain free, this, and that. I'm like, just to be clear, this person was a very impressive human before I even met them. Like most of this was done before I was here, and then I just helped clean things up. Gave them back the prerequisites. Now they're able to do the things they want. So there's a part that's played and they find value in it. That's why they love sharing it as well. But truly it was incredible to watch. So with Sydney, one thing I'll say at this Olympics specifically, because it's her third and the world knows her. She's a household name. You don't have to be a fan of track and field and her name. And when I was watching the Stade, I'm not going to say this right, and you're going to make fun of me. The Stade or Stade de France, the stadium there where track and field is.
you have the worst French I've ever heard, by the
I
way.
know. This is an ongoing thing between you. One day you'll teach me how to
Canadian
speak
telling you
properly.
that, so I mean, take that for what it's worth. But
So we're at the stadium, and they're each athlete walks out one at a time for each race. It's a scene, right?
mm,
So the Ukrainian athlete walks out, and the Ukrainian fans go wild, and then the France athlete comes out, and now we're in France, so the stadium erupts, right? Because there's more French locals there than there are for people from other countries, and then the Belgium person comes out, and then this. And then Sydney walks out. So the USA fans should erupt, but 100% of the people in that stadium, it's deafening. Like I have goosebumps right now because I could hear it because it was that loud. Like it was something I'll never forget. Every single person in that stadium wanted to see Sydney do well. Even her competitors, like Diane and I were there. We're wearing Team Sid shirts, like the rest of the coaching staff there and everything else. And her main competitors' fans were coming up to us asking to take photos with us just because we're there with Team Sid. And it's like those are her competitors. They want to see their person win over Sydney, but they're just as excited to see Sydney run over anything else. So to put it, I have such a hard time even to this day. It's been months. I have a hard time putting into words how it felt to witness that in person, because it was like the whole world united to celebrate for one person. And normally you don't really applaud your person losing to a competitor, but everyone was just amazed to see what she did and every event that she competed in. So she got her gold. She had a family member put a tiara on her, and then she walked around with the flag. And she saw it was myself, Diana, and then her performance nutritionist that was with us, a good friend of mine, Mary Shanuda. And the three of us were there, and we got to hug her and take photos, and she was just elated. And she says to me, and the camera doesn't really pick it up because the stadium's going wild. But she goes, I did my FRC today, and she said that she has a gold medal around her neck, and she has a tiara on, an
oh,
American
you're
flag around
kidding.
her.
Oh,
And
you're
she goes, I
kidding.
did my FRC today and I feel so good. And she goes, this is amazing. And there's everyone's yelling to try and get her attention, but she's just dead focused on Diana, Mary, and myself, just talking to us about how good she felt. And it was just like, that's a peak moment in my career I will never forget, because she was just so excited, as she should be. She just set another world record, got another gold medal. It's hard to really put that story into words of how powerful it was.
I mean, you must learn so much from her, just being around her. The
100%.
you learn so much from these. That's a special person. I mean, the reason why
Yeah.
everyone's going to applaud is because they knew they were going to see something special. They were going to see
Yep.
arguably one of the best athletes in the world do something. So I
Yep.
mean, that's incredible. I had a few things also written down here. So what are what do I have here? Future aspirations for Sydney. I mean, like you said, she's 25. You've increased the frequency of your work with her.
Yep.
I mean, like you said, as long as those progress reports keep ticking up, I mean, that's what you're doing. But I mean, I'm assuming you're also monitoring, little nagging things. This doesn't
Always.
go well. I have a little injury here or there. Hopefully those are not, but you're
But the
always.
beautiful thing about it, as you described earlier, is that since we've been together so long, and since she has such an interest in understanding this, I don't have to ask many questions. She comes in with the information, which is what we always say we want out of our athletes, right? Like I want my athlete to come in and be like, hey, like for 6 months, my cars have felt great. But for some reason, the last 2 days, there's a little closing no sensation. It's not bad, but it's there. Like I don't have to do an FRA today. I have everything I need to know to alter our training. Like I already know what to do. I know what to switch our focus to, right? So when yes, there's always little things we're managing, always, because she's such a hard worker. There's so many stressors she's going through on a regular basis on top of the stress of being who she is, like being this phenom that the world is looking to constantly. Like that's a stressor within itself, right? So with all that weight on her, like she'll come in and be like, hey, like, you know, the hip this, knee this, back this, like, is there anything we could change today to focus on that? And the answer is always yes. But as long as we're staying the course, having our guiding light being the assessment as like, here's still what we're working towards. But if this week, if we need to manage something, we'll manage something accordingly. And that's once again done from a team perspective, not just me. So if we need to change our internal training to focus on this, and the external training, we should take that out this week just because that's gonna load that tissue too much. Let's give this a chance, right?
Man. So if you were, let's say you were a younger hunter and you've been in the system, you've been doing this type of work for many, many years. If you were a younger hunter, or you could give advice to a younger hunter, or maybe, you know, you went to a lot of systems, you've done a lot of things, you've been in this industry for a long time. So I guess the question is, why stick to this methodology? Or why have you chose to stick to this methodology? What advice would you give for coaches who don't know whether or not they want to explore, you know, this methodology, or even the additions, part additions of this methodology into what they're doing? Do you have anything?
Sure. I guess how I viewed continuing education in the past is like everything always had an asterisk at the end of it. Yeah, that was a really good weekend, but it's really only good for this, or it's really only good for this population of people, or it's really only applicable if these perfect circumstances are all the ducks are in a row, which never happens in the real world. And functional range system was the most complete bird's eye view down of like, I can't find the asterisk here. I can't find the situation where this wouldn't be the right approach. It works. It's a Homo sapien approach. It's a human approach. It's a human centric model where it's just meeting the person where they are and pulling them towards the state that they want to get at. And there's no but, and there's no if. There's no scenario where that isn't the case. There's no, yeah, but it's really good, but only if they're high level lifters. It's only good if they're athletes. It's only good if this. It's just, you can take anybody. It's such an interesting thing. Like if I had a live stream of my day in this room, it's like I'll have Sydney here in a couple hours, and then right after that, I'm gonna have like three senior citizen grandmothers in a row. Then I'm gonna have a kin stretch class. The kin stretch class is gonna have a circus athlete next to a black belt jiu-jitsu, next to three stay-at-home moms, next to like it's such a medley of things because it's just training for the human. It's just bringing people to a better state of themselves. It's not comparing. It's not trying to make them like me. I've said this a million times, and maybe even on your podcast. Like my goal with my athletes is not to bring them towards my state. Like I would waste thousands of hours and potentially ruin a few careers along the way if I tried to make my NFL guys have as much range of motion as I have. How silly would that be? Right. So it's just bringing them from their point A to a better point B down the road, utilizing a systemic approach to critically thinking around why is this person here? You know, you've said this before, and I said it too. Like, I hate that not everyone, most of the people that I meet are at a state in their lives where things hurt or aren't going well physically or whatever else. And that's why they started to look up, I'm going to put in quotes, mobility work and other things. Like, that's why they started to look for another option. I hate meeting people in that state. I work with a lot of people like pretty major surgery and they're trying to avoid it and whatever else, get hip replacements, you know, fusions in their back, whatever else. But that even for them, that population where it's like now hardware is in their body, nothing, I've never seen anything work as effective as this, as to just meet them where they are, identify what they have, identify what they don't have, and then just shift them to the, you know, towards a better state of being over time. I would tell younger me to take these courses sooner, but these, you know, I would have had to meet you sooner to accomplish that. So,
how about for the athlete listening who doesn't have access to this? If there's one thing that you can summarize, or a bit of advice that you can say with regards to how they look at their physical training, what would it be? It's a hard question. Like what would,
It is
I
a
know
hard
what I would
question.
say. Like if
I'd say one.
you have 30 minutes and you're never going to see this person again, and you have to, you want to make a big impact on their physical well-being moving forward. Like, or you can only have time for giving, do this, or think of this when you're structuring programs, or is there something you
Yeah,
can
I
give?
mean, I don't even know if I'd put this as like the upper, like this is the one thing I'd want to leave you with. But one thing that I have to say to athletes out there is that your training in the gym doesn't have to look like your sport. I
Mm,
think that is detrimental for a lot of people. Like, you know this as much as I do. Like, my baseball player doesn't have to swing with a weighted bat to make their swing better, right? Like, it doesn't have to look like the activity. I don't that comes with tissue consequences. That's not what we're trying to do. They're never going to swing with the weighted bat in their sports, and that might not be the best example, but you understand what I mean. Like, everyone's always looking for, like, well, I have to get into a sprint-like position for this to be useful for sprinters. I have to get into a position like the gymnast is going to be in to make the gymnast hip better. It's like, or it's just a human hip, and the human hip needs to be treated like a human hip who happens to be doing gymnast things. And if it can't do basic human hip function, then the sport specific positions mean nothing right now, because it's not going to go well if you don't have a good human hip. So to take a view of, you are a human first and an athlete second, right?
mm.
Take care of the human first, because if you take care of the human first and you have that basic fundamental joint motion and you have that function, you will always be able to build to be a better athlete. But if you focus on athlete first at the consequence of human, you are taking time away from yourself in the long run.
You cannot end on a better answer than that. I mean, that was fantastic. Is there anything else you want to mention before we go? You have anything coming up? Traveling soon? Actually, I have the board right in front of me. You don't even have to.
I'm doing FRC San Diego in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah, there it is. Oh yeah, San Diego. Oh, very good. Anyway, my friend, it's always a pleasure. I learn a lot from you every time I hear you. It was a great story. I hope, I wish, continued success for Sydney and all your other athletes. And that's it. I guess I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dre. Appreciate you much.
All right, my friend. Ciao. That was good.
It's good.
I thought that was good. I think the beginning was, I wasn't really, but then we got into like actual meat of it without